I'm Daisy Wood and I work for LEAF as a technical coordinator. Also with us this afternoon from LEAF is Sophia and Sarah, who will be talking a bit later on. We are hosting this webinar as part of a project called NUE-Leg, which stands for Nitrogen Utilisation Efficiency in Legumes. And David Lloyd from Germinal is going to talk a bit later on more about that project. So before we get started, a gentle reminder, although you all have, to please put yourselves on mute. And we will also be having a 10-minute Q&A at the end of this webinar. So please write down your questions as we go. Click next. Hang on a minute. There we are. So here's a quick reminder of our agenda. I will kick us off with a little insight into LEAF and what our mission is, and then we will hear from our three brilliant guest speakers before we have the Q&A. The speakers include David and Harley from Germinal, who are project partners, and Kevin and Katie, who are farmers that are very kindly involved in this project. So we've pulled together a few take-home messages for today. Firstly, it is that we'd like to raise awareness of the role of legumes, or the potential role of legumes in emission reduction on farm. Secondly, we hope that hearing from our farmers today will help you see how you could potentially start to make small, manageable steps and experiment to make differences and farm more sustainably on your farm. And then finally, it's to raise awareness that this entire conversation, we need to think contextually. Every farm is different, and of course, we recognise that. So just a little bit about LEAF, and I won't labour on this too much because I'm sure you're all very aware of who we are already. But LEAF stands for Linking Environment and Farming, and it's a leading charitable organisation helping deliver more sustainable food and farming. And our mission is to see a global food and farming system that delivers climate positive action, builds resilience, and supports the health, diversity, and enrichment of our food, farms, the environment, and society. And we achieve this through our three LEAF pillars on the right. So through an integrated farm management approach, we work to connect farmers, innovators, and industry to understand sustainable farm management, what best practice might look like, and how it can be applied effectively to each farm's unique situation. And my colleague will share a link in the chat if you want to find out a bit more about this. We also work to build trust through our independently audited LEAF Mark certification. So looking at all aspects of farming, including livestock, engaging society, and energy efficiency, some examples. And then finally, we educate. So the LEAF education team are qualified educational specialists and go into schools as well as working with farmers to bring sustainable farming to life. And these three pillars are interconnected and work towards our main aim of creating a resilient food and farming system for all. And LEAF has been supporting farmers on their journey towards sustainable farming for over 30 years now. But we have reached a critical point where the sector must both scale up and accelerate our sustainable journey. And so projects like NUE-Leg can be both inspiring, but also a real practical help in driving us forward towards that future. So thank you very much for listening. Without any further delay, I will pass you on to Sarah, who's going to introduce our first speaker.
That's great. Thank you, Daisy. So hi, everyone. My name is Sarah and I'm another technical officer here at LEAF supporting on the NUE-Leg project. So I've really enjoyed working on this project so far. So I'm really excited to kickstart the speaker portion of our webinar by introducing our first speaker, Dr. David Lloyd from Germinal. So David is head of plant breeding and helps to coordinate all forage breeding for Germinal. And so he has extensive experience in steering Germinal's horizon breeding strategy. So today he's going to be kicking off the webinar by discussing the NUE-Leg vision for achieving sustainable agriculture through legume planting and the motivation behind the project. So I will pass over to David now. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, so I've got 10 minutes to talk, so it's going to have to be quite a brief introduction to the project, and I'll be focusing really on the breeding side of the project. So NUE-Leg is a £5 million project, 4-year project, funded by the DEFRA Farming Innovation Programme, large R&D partnerships. It's a 4-year project, multi-partner, so led by Germinal, but also involving Aberystwyth University, James Hutton Institute, Origin, Agricalc, CL Leaf, obviously, Muller, Pilgrim's Pride, and Dovecot Park. So first slide, please. Okay, so around about 1 million tonnes of nitrogen fertiliser is added to UK farmland every year, with about 390,000 tonnes going on UK grasslands. So this is costly both in economic and environmental terms. It costs grassland farmers around £500 million a year, and its manufacture has an enormous carbon footprint, generating 1.4 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalents every year, even at the best available technology. On top of this, the application of nitrogen fertiliser stimulates denitrifying bacteria, which converts some of the nitrogen fertiliser that's added to the land back to nitrogen gas and to nitrous oxide. On average, around about 0.4% is converted back to nitrous oxide, which doesn't sound a lot, but as nitrous oxide has a very high global warming potential, it represents a further 500,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalents. Nitrous oxide is also the most important anthropogenic ozone-depleting substance, and there are additional problems in nitrate leaching associated with nitrogen fertiliser application. Thus, the reduction of nitrogen fertiliser application is of key importance in reaching net zero. Next slide, please. So legumes are a family of plants that bypass the need for applied nitrogen fertiliser by producing essentially what is their own natural nitrogen fertiliser. They have structures in their roots that you can see on this picture called root nodules, which house symbiotic bacteria called rhizobia. These rhizobia take atmospheric nitrogen and convert it to ammonia, which is then available for the plant to use. Using forage legumes like clover in grasslays can significantly reduce the need for nitrogen fertiliser. However, its effectiveness is very much dependent on environmental factors. Estimates of nitrogen fixation rates range from 100 to 380 kilograms of nitrogen fixed per hectare per year, with most farms that use clover being at the lower end of this range. Few farmers have the capacity to manage their pastures for optimum nitrogen fixation, and they have to rely on native rhizobia that's already present in their soil, which may have a low fixation potential, and fixation rates are dependent on micronutrient availability. So next slide, yeah, thank you. In well-managed lays, nitrogen fixation from clover can replace nitrogen fertiliser almost completely. Trials run in the Republic of Ireland, which is this data here, have shown that under dairy grazing management, it's possible to get higher yields from mixed swards receiving no nitrogen fertiliser than it is with ryegrass monocultures, receiving 240 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare per year. These data, of course, have been collected under well-managed, scientifically run trials, and there is a major challenge in extending this effect to the farm scale, which is where NUE-Leg comes in. So next slide. So we're using a number of approaches in NUE-Leg to enable farmers to reliably achieve higher rates of nitrogen fixation in grasslands. At the James Hutton Institute, our colleagues are screening curated collections of rhizobia that have been collected over the last 100 years or so, looking for elite lines. The hope is to identify strains that are better able to infect the host and give better nitrogen fixation. At Germinal Horizon, we're selecting for better nodulation potential in 3 innovative forage legumes. I'll be describing these later on in the talk. Our colleagues at Origin are developing prescription soil nutrition options formulated for specific soils, supporting nitrogen fixation rather than seeking to replace it. They're also developing digital aids to help farmers plan their sward management. Agricalc will be calculating the improvements in the carbon footprints achieved by farmers by carrying out life cycle assessments. And this is all supported by on-farm trialling of these approaches. Next slide. So the first innovative forage legume that we're using is a hybrid between white clover and Caucasian clover. So Caucasian clover is a clover that's very closely related to white clover. It's found in the mountainous regions of Caucasia as the name suggests. And this is sort of in Eastern Europe, spreading into Western Asia, around about southern Russia and that sort of area. They're naturally adapted to thin soils and are therefore very drought tolerant and tolerant of extremes of temperature. They have underground stems, which we call rhizomes, rather than having stolons, and this imparts some of the tolerance of abiotic stress. The problem with them is that they're very slow growing and have a poor yield. So the approach that we took with this this species was to hybridize it with white clover, and through a system of successive back crossing with white clover, produced hybrids. So next slide. So the first variety we produced is called Everlasting, and these are all going to be marketed under the catch-all term double root. So this is a back cross 2-generation cross. It's mostly white clover, but it has the Caucasian clover traits that we're after. It's very drought tolerant. In the top picture there, you can see the rhizomes of the plant. The middle picture there, you can see double root on the left-hand side, next to white clover. And this is in drought bins that have been subjected to water deficit for a period of 3 weeks. The double root is still going strong. The conventional white clover has wilted and is pretty much on its way to meet its maker. It's very cold tolerant. Sorry, go back to that one. Yes, thank you. The bottom picture there shows Everlasting double root that has been subjected to cold shock overnight at -30 degrees, where the conventional white clovers have all died and the Everlasting has recovered fine. It's also very, very grazing tolerant. Next slide. So red clover, very similar to white clover in a lot of ways. What really distinguishes it is it grows erect from a central crown. It's very high yielding and has deep roots, so very drought tolerant, but that crown is very vulnerable to damage, so it is not very tolerant of grazing. So it's mostly used for silage cutting. Next slide, please. What's very interesting about red clover is it has an enzyme in its leaves called polyphenol oxidase. And what this does is when the leaves are damaged, either under grazing or if you're using red clover in silage clamps when the clover is wilted, this interacts with diphenols that are present in the vacuole of the cell to produce quinones. And what those are isn't really important, but what happens is those quinones will bind to proteins and protect the proteins when the proteins are in the rumen of the animal. So it makes them less available for degradation by rumen microflora. So this also reduces lipolysis and reduces biohydrogenation of lipids. So you get more polyunsaturated fatty acids in the end product. This has implications obviously for live weight gain and also for milk production in the animals. Next slide, please. One of the exciting things that we have produced is a new type of red clover, which we call red runner. And this is a stoloniferous red clover. So it has a growth habit that's very, very similar to white clover, but has the polyphenol oxidase in its leaves. So what you get from that is forage, which will have you'll have more protein from the forage getting through to the actual hanging parts of the animal's digestion, rather than being degraded in the rumen by the rumen microflora. Less ammonia being lost at the back end of the animal, so you're ending up with far greater nitrogen use efficiency.
Hi David, sorry, just to interject, just to give you a minute warning if that's okay, because I need to move on, sorry.
Okay, next slide then. I'm nearly finished. And the final forage that we're improving is bird's foot trefoil. So this is a forage legume that has tannins in its leaves, and these provide protein protection. They're anti-bloat, so you don't get the effect of the animals blowing up under legume intake. They're anthelmintic, so they're anti-parasitic. The problem with them is that existing varieties have persistency. We've been breeding for higher persistency lotus varieties over the last 10 years or so, and we have some new germplasm which is showing remarkable persistency under grazing, 3 years plus. So these are the three legumes that we're improving within the NUE-Leg project. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you so much for talking, David, and sorry for the short notice, but
That's
it was
okay.
great to hear more about the motivations behind the NUE-Leg project. So next up, to gain some kind of real world insight into how our project's going, we're going to be hearing from Katie and Kevin, who are one of our leaf NUE-Leg farmers based at Trenance farm. So without further ado, I will pass on to them so they can discuss their achievements and journey so far.
First hiccup, forgot to unmute. Afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much. I'm Katie. This is
Kevin.
We are tenant dairy farmers in South East Cornwall. We rent 134 acres from Cornwall County Council. We've been here since January 2018, and we are a dairy farm, and we're running about 100 cows plus followers. Started on 1st January. We took over obviously from another tenant. The farm was very tired, very worn out. The ground had been pretty used and abused. It says on our slide there we had really low pHs of sort of somewhere down to 4.5. We really struggled in the first few years to get the farm to, I mean, it looked green, but we couldn't really get any milk out of it. So we sort of spent a lot of time trying to work out how we're going to make this tenancy work, how we're going to get the cows to produce enough milk to be able to pay all the bills. And yeah, it's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's like Kate said, it was an uphill struggle. So we've invested a lot of time and effort in back to basics, really, feeding the ground, slurry and lime, looking at pHs and soil health, reseeded 95% of the farm now. With more mainstream varieties so far, but we're just now obviously within the NUE-Leg project using new varieties and more legumes. But up to now, we've used a lot of abergrasses and clovers. So we were sort of picking the better varieties that we knew of beforehand, and now we're learning even more.
Yeah, we supply Arla with our milk, so they're quite hot on sustainability and efficiency, protein usage, making sure every litre of milk that is taken off farm, we can show how we produce that milk sustainably and effectively. So that's kind of made us stop and have a look at what we're doing. We've done a lot of work with the farm carbon toolkit as well, carbon footprinting the farm, trying to work out we know where most of our inefficiencies were, but how to kind of improve them and keep everything going. So like Kev said, we spoke to different seed companies and they suggested just put in grass seeds, just put in grass seeds, just put in grass seeds. And we sort of started noticing there was a few more herbal lays going in locally, and we sort of said, look, perhaps we should try this. And they were like, no, you just want grass, you're too intensive, you'll never make herbal lays work, you just got to keep doing grass, reseeding it. So that's kind of, because we were new into it, we kind of just followed what other people were saying because that's what they were doing. And it's been the last couple of years really, we've just sort of gone, it's not really working, we're throwing all this into the ground and it's not really giving us the grass quality or the milk quality that we needed back again. So when we came across this project, I was like, happy days, I'm desperate to try some herbal lays. You've been quite skeptical of the whole thing.
I was, yeah.
Purely because we are quite intensive for the amount of stock we've got, for the amount of acres that we're running. We are pretty intensive. We are reliant on sort of, 21, 28 day turnaround on rotation, and cows go out ideally beginning of March, and then they'll come in again by October they'll be housed by night, by November they're in full time. So we do spend a lot of time having cows traveling out to grass. So yeah, it's been difficult to try and manage that effectively and not spend loads of money on fertilizer, because as you all know, the last couple of years the prices have just been horrendous. It's just gone through the roof, and it crippled us, didn't it, 2 years ago? Prices are up. We paid 800 and what did we pay? 800?
Yeah, 800 quid anyway. 800 quid 2 years ago. I know we're back to 300 now, but if we can cut out that fertilizer use, we've already halved our fertilizer use by better slurry usage. So if we can reduce that even more now with nitrogen fixing, the long-term game, if it was possible, is to not buy any fertilizer and use slurry and legumes together to grow a sustainable crop.
Could you flick to the next slide? Is that all right, please? Oh, that's exciting. Oh, so yeah, that's a snapshot of when we first came in. We had the beast from the east, and then we've had droughts. Like, we've literally had every difficult weather condition that you can imagine thrown at us since we came. And the bottom left, you can see the field just looks like rubbish. It's something you'd expect to see it on Bodmin Moor, not in the middle of southeast Cornwall. Like, it's been a real uphill struggle. Next slide, please. Thank you. So yeah, we're currently supplying Arla. We're doing about 4.8 butterfat, 3.6 protein. We were lucky enough a few years ago to fall in on a methane project, and that's given us a new slurry lagoon with amazing form of digestate. We had no real way of utilising the slurry that we had before, whereas now we've got digestate that we can apply with a trailing shoe. So we can put out what we need, when we need, and how we need it. That's really helped the grass, but we were still finding that we were getting grass, but we weren't keeping the grass, and it wasn't, we'd cut it for silage, and it wasn't sustaining, was it? And as soon as we had a drought, it was gone. So the last 2 or 3 summers, June, July, and August, we've had cows in. And for a grazing farm to have cows in the middle of summer, it's not nice. The cows don't want it, but we just had no grass. Like, we had no resilience in our soil to take the weather. So the digestate has really helped with that, but we just felt we needed to do something else to give us a bit more root and give us a bit more longevity. So we did do one field of herbal lays, didn't we? And this summer has actually been a bit of a triumph for that, because whenever all the other fields are looking a bit blur, that's really responded, and the cows have loved it, and they've gone in, grazed it, kept the milk, kept the fertility, and come back out. And it was a real sort of, oh, why didn't we do this before? Why did we listen to everyone else and not just go with what we felt our farm needed? Because you can only farm what you've got underneath you, can't you?
Yeah, we as Kate said, I was skeptical of it, but we found that we've changed our grazing habits as well. Like, we're leaving a lot more sort of residual grass, sort of graze them quick, especially on that herbal lay. Just let them go over it. Where we used to sort of strip graze or block graze cattle, we're tending to either just set half fields now, sort of 3 to 4 acres a day, so that they're not so intense, and it actually seems to be working better. You leave grass behind, but it returns a lot quicker. So it's also changing practices to maximize what you can get out of it. You feel, oh, they haven't grazed all that grass and you're wasting it, but when you get a quicker return, it's not a waste at all.
No, and input costs have been so high, it's almost made us stop and think about our artificial fertilizer purchases, and sort of say, well, do we really need to be putting that out? The last sort of 12 months, we've only been buying nitrogen anyway. We haven't needed to put anything else on, because of what we've had in the slurry lagoon has been so good. We've only needed to put on nitrogen, and we have noticed a difference with clover mixes within the grass and things. They have responded, especially this time of year. Like, the clovers just, it's really taken off. Do you want to flick on a slide, please? Is that right? Thank you. So yeah, we've obviously taken part in the project, which has been really exciting. I'll let you explain that, because that was you did the sowing process.
So yeah, we just those pictures there. So obviously we've just been talking about our slurry lagoon. That's top right of that picture. So we've got a fully enclosed slurry pit, captures methane, and it's anaerobic as well. So it's different to a lot of pits. So it gives us a lot more liquid slurry, because anaerobic bacteria eat the solids, which is why we're able to apply it more. Going back to the project, we had a field next to the yard, which is permanent pasture. We've never reseeded it. Picture there of it. It was quite productive, but like, as soon as it got dry, it would disappear, as Kate was saying. And it's a field that we relied on quite often at night to put the cows in because it's next to the yard, it's easy. So it was getting a hard life. We were demanding a lot from it and not getting the return. So when this project come along to test the grazing resilience of these legumes, it was the perfect opportunity to get reseed that field. And at this time of year, it's not been that much of a hardship to take it out for the last sort of 2 or 3 months of grazing this year to let it establish. And we're hoping to see good return from its grazing capabilities in the spring.
So do you want to, I don't know if there's another one or that was the last of them. I can't remember how many slides are.
Oh,
No,
that's
fine.
us.
That's not us. Go back. So the process was quite straightforward. Like I said, we had a field that was really tired. It needed to be rejuvenated basically. And we just felt it's what is it, 8 acres, the field
Yeah.
altogether? It's a really good chance for us to have a play basically and just prove that with our slurry that we have, and we've got freezing cows that can utilize grass like you'd never believe. It was a really good opportunity for us to have a play basically and just experiment with what we can do, and if it takes off, we can roll it out across the whole farm. So you were involved. The drilling process of it was quite straightforward, wasn't it?
Yeah, so we've just ploughed, power hoed. Obviously, mentioned earlier on, Origin are involved in the project as well. So Origin, early on, we took soil samples. Origin supplied us a bespoke fertiliser mix, which is spread over at a very low rate. It was only 100 kilos a hectare, and then the trial plots were hand sown by Reen and his team. And we've got 9 plots on each side, I think. I'll have to check. And so of the variant varieties and some control varieties. And then around the rest of the field, we were given a standard sort of Aberystwyth grass and clover mix for the rest of the field as to seed that and as a bit of a control as well. So yeah, we're looking forward to seeing the differences in the plots on the different varieties of clover and the trefoil as well.
Yeah, and we soil sample every year. We've done that with Farm Carbon Toolkit since we came, so we've got quite a good understanding of what goes on into the soil. The picture you can see there is the field that we've reseeded. And it was okay. It'd been there. We don't really know how long the ley had been there. No one can ever remember it being reseeded. So it did seem a bit sad to disturb all of that. But on the other hand, everything else had been reseeded. It was nice to see what the difference would be. But yeah, like I said, we've been reseeding every soil sampling every year. So it'll be interesting to see the difference in this field going forwards on what the other fields have done. But we can only do an autumn reseed here. Spring reseeds don't work, do they?
No, with the weather conditions, if it's dry coming into the summer, we've tried in the past, and it'll just either it won't establish at all, or it does establish and then get stressed by the weather. So you lose the whole growing season. It's trying to establish through the summer, so you lose a whole year. Whereas at least now we'll only lose a month or 2 in the winter here, and then by the spring it'll be ready to graze.
And I'm hopeful that it'll work. We can graze it, we can milk off it, and we won't need to truck in any fertilizer, and we can be a completely, well, not closed circular farm, because that sounds really cliche, doesn't it? But make the whole farm work, so like everything links into everything else. Because at the end of the day, we're on a tenancy. We need to be able to pay our rent, have a life, raise the children, and still enjoy what we've got. So yeah, it's exciting to see what it'll do. Hopefully it'll do what it says on the tin. It's looking good. The field, it's germinating, it's showing a nice green hue out there now. It looks good, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It has really taken off. So yeah, we're hopeful. I think that's about us.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, both. It's been really kind of inspiring to hear about your farming story and all the challenges you've faced, as well as your motivations for wanting to take part in this project. So lastly, I'd like to pass on to Harley Keach, who is also from Germinal. So he's going to be our closing speaker today, and he's going to be giving us a presentation on mastering the establishment of legumes, as well as offering some simple steps to success and how you can easily implement these into your farming practices. So I will pass on to Harley.
Thanks, Sarah. Good afternoon, everybody. So yeah, I'm Harley. I'm the area sales manager for North Wales and Central England for Germinal. I'm going to talk through legumes, the best way to establish these and how they complement layers of perennial ryegrass and multi-species. Do feel free to ask any questions you may have in the chat functions. If I miss anything you'd like to, you would like to discuss, don't hesitate to contact me after this webinar. So let's start at the beginning with the establishment. Like all plants, they need certain criteria to be met to establish well and persist over the years. I'm sorry, I can't see you now, so I'm looking at my own presentation. Yeah, thank you. The establishment of legumes is possible through several options, and which option you choose will be down to machinery, rotations, timeliness, cost, and workload. However you choose to establish the ley will have good results if you follow some simple golden rules. White clover is reasonably versatile. It can be established undersown in the spring with a cereal or late summer after a cereal, or introduced into an existing sward. There is potential to upgrade existing swards due to a large seed and a vigorous seedling. Again, these can all produce good results with different drills depending on your soil type and the rotation on your farm. If you choose to oversow red and white clover into an existing sward, please remember to control weeds before you consider oversowing clover. Some herbicides can have a residue of up to 4 months. Ideally, oversow clover after a silage harvest or a very tight grazing. If you choose to drill after a tight grazing, drill the seed and then keep the stock in until you can see the new shoots appearing, circa 10 days, and then remove the stock. Do not apply any N, and ideally skip bagged N for the remainder of the year, but at least for 2 grazing rounds. You'd like to ideally graze every 2 weeks or so for about 3 grazings to ensure light gets down to the base of the sward to aid that clover establishment. Moisture is very important, so it is better to wait for it than try and drill too deeply. You do need that open ley. Soil must be visible. There is no point oversowing into a thatched grass ley. And finally, do roll if necessary to get that good seed to soil contact. Timings of the drillings for white and red clover will be important, and these need to be done well before the autumn, mid to end of August, allowing enough time for the plant to provide water, germinate, roots and shoots, and store enough energy to survive its first winter. Legumes will begin to come alive with warming soils, 8 and 9 degrees and above, and note that soil temperature and not air temperature. For anybody looking at conventional establishment, we're looking to ensure a fine, firm seed bed, free from weeds and good consolidation after drilling. Fully reseeding is likely to see better results in terms of establishment. However, this can come at a cost from the increased operations needed to establish the ley and the time removed from the silage or grazing platform. And again, with all these options, do not bury the seed too deep. No deeper than
Oh, sorry, I'm very sorry to interrupt. Are you able to let me know when I need to move on to the next slide?
Absolutely. I'm just about to finish this one, no problem.
Fab, okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, if you can next slide, please. We need to soil test in good time. We're aiming for that sweet spot of pH between 6.2 and 6.5, alongside P and K indices of 2. If you choose to establish a new layer by destroying the old ley with Roundup and harrowing, ensure an application of quick-acting lime is applied to neutralise that decaying layer of thatch. Seed rates for clover are as listed on the slide, and we're aiming to target good plant populations, particularly if it's a monoculture. In established lays, there are some herbicide options coming, but the key is achieving good plant populations at the outset to outcompete the undesirables. 3 kilos an acre mixed in with a grass mixture will provide around 400 seeds plus, and we're looking for around the 200 plants per metre squared by the end of the first full year. Post sowing in the spring, you may take a later cut if it's been undersown to a cereal, but later sowings would be a light graze to nip the top off and encourage the plant to anchor in and make sure there isn't too much young leaf on the plant, potentially going into the cold and frosty weather. White clover is three times as many seeds per kilo as red clover, which is one of the reasons why we use less seed alongside the stoloniferous growth of the white clover compared to the red. Next slide, please. So the legume begins its journey of fixing nitrogen as the plant exudes flavonoids, which are highly volatile chemicals into the soil in response to low nitrogen levels. This stimulates the soil rhizobia to produce and exude nod factors. The nod factors cause the curling of the root hair to cover the bacteria and produce an infection chamber. An infection thread is then stimulated, which carries the bacteria down the root hair and into the plant cells. The bacteria multiply, causing the swelling called a nodule. When digging up legumes, if the nodules are pink in colour, they are actively growing and fixing nitrogen. White nodules are either to begin fixing nitrogen or they have fixed enough for that site. Next slide, please. We also shouldn't forget the importance of legumes to organic systems, where it is a key conservation and fertility building crop. Typically undersown with a spring cereal, is a valuable break crop, improving soil nutrients and minerals as well as soil structure, is a cost-effective improvement of soil fertility, and there are very similar principles listed there for white clover also. Grazing red clover, either aftermath or intensive grazing with chicory and ryegrass, as you can see in the picture, is a very useful feed, and lamb growth rates can be increased and time to finishing reduced, without compromising carcass quality, but with higher killing out percentages. When grazing, we need to make sure to avoid physical damage to the plant and compaction. This will apply particularly if it is wet, when just treading on the plant can split the crown. We also need to be mindful of bloat caused by an excessive buildup of gas inside the animal, putting pressure on the vital organs, which is from the rapid breakdown of the clover protein. To help alleviate this, we should limit access when stock are first introduced and don't turn them into a clover-rich pasture hungry. Feed fibre or hay before turnout, or feed fibre in the field. Extra care at mid to the end of the season on damp mornings, or feed a bloat guard or an anti-bloat additive. We need to be mindful with red clover, either grazing and installed with breeding ewes also. 6 weeks either side of tupping, they can suffer temporary infertility, which can be reversed on a change of diet, but it can also cause more permanent damage to the reproductive organs. There are no reports of it affecting rams or cattle. Next slide, please. The rule of thumb is that we need 30% plus white clover to fix 150 kilos of nitrogen. So understanding how much clover there is in the sward can be important. When assessing white clover inclusion in the field, it is important to note how the clover is looking like your dinner plate sat on the dining room table, compared with perennial ryegrass looking like dinner plates stacked in the racking. Always halve the amount of clover you think you have in that field. And once we've assessed the inclusion rates, we also need to consider fertiliser applications early season to feed the efficient user of the nitrogen in the ley, being the perennial ryegrass, before the white clover begins to wake up with the warming sores, as we previously mentioned. Next slide, please. Here we're seeing the correlation between persistency and yield dependent on the leaf size category, with the smaller leaf varieties fitting in with the longer term grazing lays and the larger leaf varieties suiting the shorter duration silage lays. Next slide, please. We're looking at conservation here, mainly in relation to red clover. With a graze likely in the first year of establishment, if there is a problem with annual weeds, topping is an option, but harvesting will be the preferred way to remove annual weeds. But you can graze, but if you do graze, be careful not to overgraze. You don't really want to go into the winter with too much growth, which will be susceptible to winter frost. So grazing huts for overwinter stubbles want to be circa sort of 5 to 6 centimetres. You're usually aiming for between 3 to 5 cuts per annum at sort of 6 to 8 week intervals on good sites, with a cutting height of 7 to 8 centimetres. I always think of the depth of your hands, from the soil up. As the crown is above ground, damage must be avoided. Crown survival in red clover is key to persistency. Don't cut it too low and avoid travelling with heavy machinery when it is wet. Mower type also influences field losses. The rubber roller conditioner can achieve dry matter target with less field loss compared to a steel tine conditioner, which creates too much leaf damage and subsequent leaf shatter and loss in the field. That will have an effect on lowering crude protein available. So mow and leave it in the swath rather than spread it out. Dry down to 25 to 35% dry matter, which should be achieved reasonably within 24 to 48 hours. Excess wilting will lead to excess leaf shatter and lower feed value, and leads to more difficult consolidation in the clamp or the bale. Clover is lower in water-soluble carbohydrates, so good fermentation can be achieved using high-sugar ryegrass mixtures. Next slide, please. Excuse me. Average analysis of silage does vary across the different livestock systems. So what you see on the screen here might be typical of a range on dairy farms. Beef and sheep may be aiming for higher dry matters with later cuts with potentially lower D value. But I want to draw your attention to the range in the crude protein on the slide. Ruminant protein requirements and feed protein supplies are generally expressed in terms of crude protein, which includes non-protein nitrogen as well as true protein. Ruminant degradable protein, RDP, describes the protein supply available to the rumen microbes. This is rapidly degradable, and as much as 70% of it can be lost to the environment, whilst digestible undegraded protein, the DUP, is a protein available from the feed which escapes rumen degradation. So although the crude protein levels in the analysis look similar, due to complex biochemical reactions, a proportion of the protein in the red clover is true protein, or DUP, about 40 to 70%, is available to the animal, which is why we see increases in animal intake and then subsequent performance. Next slide, please. As with all good things, there are issues to be considered and mindful of with red clover. The reason we always mention the potential of these two as a major problem is, even though we don't see great evidence on farm, is really because we know the damage they could potentially cause, and they are best avoided. Years ago, red clover was more widely used than today, although we are seeing an increased resurgence with multi-species lays and this project. We have all heard of clover crash, which is a feature of clover monocultures and mixed swards, causing severe or sometimes total loss of clover plants in the field. And it was often attributed to the two main targets, clover rot and stem nematode. Although plant breeders are screening for resistance in new varieties as red clover again increases in that popularity and acreage. Next slide, please. So we've seen the benefits of clover in grazing and conservation systems. I'm now going to explore how red clover and white clover fit within multi-species lays and their interactions within the lay from research undertaken at our Germinal Horizon research facility in Wiltshire. Next slide, please. Thank you. The research from the Germinal Horizons facility has found that the combination of grass, herbs, and legumes in the top rows is best suited for persistency, longevity, and growth habits in a multi-species system, as well as dry matter yield and quality characteristics. The second rows you see there on the screen can still be used, but they may need certain conditions to maximize their potential. Next slide, please. On screen, these are the mixtures sown at Germinal Horizon Wiltshire in our multi-species lay trial, plus a pure perennial ryegrass baseline of Abergreen and an Abergreen and Aber pasture, which is a blend of our medium-leaf clovers, including Aberlasting. The Aber multi-species grazing is our standard mixture with and without an additional herb pack. You see the Germinal mixture there, which is pushing the multi-species grazing to diverse grass, including Timothy, Coxford, and meadow fescue. And then the right-hand mixture is a very diverse mixture, the kitchen sink almost, and we utilise this as a reference. It has the lowest grass inclusion rates, but has comparable levels of legumes and herbs. Also, for consistency, all components are the same variety within these different mixture regimes. Next slide, please. The main thing to draw your attention to here is we saw significant botanical change interactions due to the impacts of nitrogen fertiliser demonstrated in 2021. The trial is under 150 kilo and a 250 kilo nitrogen regime, and the 150 kilos regime is mimicking animal returns, and your 250 kilos is animal returns plus extra nitrogen applications for, say, silage or pushing that lay. But what we saw here was the additional nitrogen and was actually contracting the white clover down to 34% in the 250 kilos from the 51% in the 150 kilos. With white clover being the most energy dense element in comparison with the perennial ryegrass, compositional changes can have a profound effect. Coupled with the N regime appearing to impact on white clover quality, this contributes to a significant impact overall in lay quality. Next slide, please. Here we're seeing, and I know we saw this earlier with David, but just sort of really reiterate work undertaken at Cheggers of white clover inclusion rates and fertiliser application. You will see how beneficial the white clover is at increasing herbage yield with no nitrogen application compared to a perennial ryegrass baseline, an increase of 4.2 tonne of dry matter. Compared to on the opposite end of the scale, including clover and a 240 kilo of N application during the season, equated to a 1.8 tonne dry matter increase. This is a dry matter yield response of 0.0075 kilos for every unit of N applied, hopefully giving you reassurance as growers to begin targeting application, leaving the fertiliser in the shed, or better still, with the supplier. Next slide, please. Thank you. Here we're seeing the yield summary for the different mixtures at the Germinal Horizon facility. I wanted to draw your attention to 2 points from this slide. One being the additional yield from the perennial ryegrass baseline to the perennial ryegrass and white clover with 150 kilos of N, producing circa an extra 9 tonne of dry matter over the 4 years. As we've seen from the fertiliser interaction slide previously, clover is a very energy-dense fraction of the sward, producing a profound effect on the quality the animal is either grazing in the field or being fed in the shed. Secondly, I wanted to highlight from the research that more isn't always better in mixture complexity. The diverse mix, that kitchen sink, can tip the balance of the productive species to accommodate the secondary herbs and legumes, with only a 5 tonne dry matter per hectare increase over the 5 years. Next slide, please. The legumes are contributing high protein levels throughout the season with a mean of 22%. Clearly, seasonal and species fluctuations do occur there. In general, the levels increase throughout the season and forms a protein-dense fraction of the sward, which is diluted back down by other components. However, the legume crude protein relationship is not as simple as displayed in the overall averages above. There is an interaction with fertiliser, as we saw earlier, and please note these are amalgamated results for the plots and fertiliser regimes. What this doesn't show is the yields of the legumes, and as you can see, the bird's foot trefoil is yielding well for crude protein during the season, but its yield contribution is low, so not allowing enough contribution within the diet to alter the overall balance. Showing that legumes can play, though, a big part in reducing the need for purchased protein and placing the emphasis on homegrown protein. Next slide, please. Lastly, I want to mention bird's foot trefoil. This would be considered a secondary legume in the context of a multi-species ley. However, with the work being undertaken by David and his team at Germinal Horizon Aberystwyth, this may change the perception of bird's foot trefoil into a more prominent legume in the ley. Next slide, please. And lastly, I wanted to highlight the need for maintenance of the grassland you manage and how quickly forage can remove phosphate and potash from the field in every trailer load of silage carted away. This needs to be accounted for in the return from muck and slurry to the field and a programme for when these are to be added. For example, one silage trailer carrying 20 tonne is removing on average 34 kilos of phosphate and 120 kilos of potash. This does need to be returned to maintain that sweet spot of P and K indices of 2 and above. Thank you.
Thank you, Harley. It was really great to hear about all your research and expertise into legume establishment. So as we wrap up today's speaker portion of the webinar, I just wanted to thank all our speakers again for sharing all your hard work with us today. So we look forward to seeing what you all do next. And for anyone watching, please feel free to get in contact with any of our speakers to ask further questions. So without further ado, I will now pass on to Sophia, who is another NUE-Leg colleague here at Leaf, and she'll be running today's Q&A session. So I'll pass on to Sophia. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sarah. And just to reiterate what Sarah said there, and a massive thank you to all of our speakers today. I think it's so interesting to be able to hear more of the technical side of things and also hear from a personal standpoint how you guys are finding it, Kevin and Katie as well. I think it's really interesting to have both of those viewpoints. So I might kick off this Q&A question. I've got a question of my own actually based, Harley, off your PowerPoint. I was doing a bit of reading before the webinar, and I do appreciate you trying to keep within the time constraints there. But something I read on the PowerPoint about bird's foot trefoil is you mentioned that it's mostly a secondary legume in multi-species lays at the moment. But something else that was mentioned, I know you didn't have a chance to mention it out loud here. If anyone else does want to have a look at the slides, we will publish them after and send them out to you as well. But something you did have mentioned was that they can be a bit slow to establish and they're not always the best in competition. So I was wondering, in relation to it being a secondary legume in a multi-species ley, what's the best way, do you think, to establish them so that they cope well with the competition, that kind of thing? Because I think they're such an important thing to implement. I think it would be great to know.
Certainly. really you want to be looking at full reseed to get them established well. Overseeding some of these smaller herbs and legumes can produce patchy, variable results at best. Really not overgrazing. They don't tolerate hard grazing, so that rotational grazing is going to be key, allowing these things to rest, recuperate, produce more leaf matter and photosynthesize again and restore their reserves. Hopefully with the breeding that David's doing, and David, chip in if you need to, will increase that persistency and aggressiveness within the ley to sort of begin to be more akin to perennial ryegrass and the other, the clovers in the ley as well.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, just for a bit of context, the slides will be sent out to anyone else wondering, but bird flip trefoil is an amazing legume to implement if you can. So I think it's just important to know how it can be accessible to everybody. Next up, I'm going to ask Daisy's question. Daisy would love to know what Kevin and Katie plan to do in the future if the legume establishment goes well. For example, can you scale it up to the whole farm?
Yeah, we can. That is the hope, that it goes well enough and we can graze it and we can manage it effectively, that we can roll it out across the whole of the grazing platform, because we're quite lucky the farm is quite centralised. So we've got tracks, and we've put astroturf tracks to all the grazing fields, and they've got good water supply because we've got our own borehole. So the plan would be to roll it out across the whole grazing platform, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully by a process of overseeding, if we can get away with it, because like we've already done most of the reseeding in the last sort of 5 years. So if we can overseed with a good mix now, that would be quite an easy thing to do without having to disturb, sort of plough cultivations again. Now it's also the bigger picture is every time you plough it, obviously your carbon release and keeping on top of your carbon footprint as well.
Yeah, perfect. It's nice to hear how well it's going for you guys so far. Just while we're talking to you at the moment, actually, I have another question for you guys. I know, Katie, you mentioned that, Kevin, you were a bit doubtful at the start about how the project was going. I was wondering what exactly it was that made you doubtful. Did you not think it would work, or did you not think it would be financially viable? What was it that made you a bit dubious about the project?
Well, for me, it was just the age. Like we've been on visits on other like sustainable farms, then if you want to call it that are using solely herbal leys. But if you look at their stocking rates, they're able to shut up ground for months at a time because their stocking rates are so low that they can keep cattle moving around. Whereas we're very intense, we're nearly an animal an acre, that we haven't got that luxury. And all the visits we went on previously were like, yeah, well, it works because you got to let it rest and give it a chance to recuperate. So I was skeptical that we haven't got that luxury. So if we overgraze it and you kill it off, then you end up with perhaps nothing. Whereas at least with a ryegrass type mix, you get a quick return. But it is proven that you can graze it fairly regularly. So we have proven it wrong, but that's how I was so skeptical, because every sort of other project we've seen was a very low stocking rate.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's really important for people to see as well, that you are someone that did come into the project a little bit doubtful about how it could roll out, but actually it's just turned out amazing for you guys, and it's everything you could have wished it to be and more, really. So I think that's really important for people to see. In chat, we have another question from Daisy. Have Germinal done many experiments on the new varieties produced through the NUE-Leg project? Do they have stats on how they compare to the stats Harley showed us today? So that one's probably for either you, Harley, or David, I think.
Well, yes, we run experiments on all the varieties that we're producing, and they stack up very well. Obviously, the red runner will not be as high yielding as a standard conventional red clover. It has to be viewed in a completely different way. But what we find with that particular variety is that it has a similar sort of persistency under hard grazing as the best white clover has. Similar story with the bird foot trefoil types that we're producing now as well. The double root type white clovers, they aren't as high yielding, I think it's fair to say, than some of the conventional white clovers, but that's not the purpose of them. The purpose of them is to be able to persist under abiotic stress. Okay.
Thank you very much, David. Hopefully that answers your question, Daisy. I think maybe we've got time for one or two more questions. I can see one in the chat from Dan. This is another question for Kevin and Katie. How would you encourage other farmers to get started in moving away from a conventional ryegrass system? Given the challenges you've had when first trying to explore the alternatives, like being told to stick with ryegrass, how important is it to find advisors on the same wavelength?
Yeah, it is important. I mean, we did a lot of we're in quite a lot of I'm in quite a lot of benchmarking groups and discussion groups and grass groups, and it just going out and visiting things. Like we said, we went out and visited lots of different farms and different visits, and yeah, we've seen their extensive 500 acres and 20 cow systems, and you think, oh my goodness, how on earth are we going to replicate that at home? But the more you go out and see stuff, the more you're like, well, do you know what, we could actually scale that back to what we're doing. And it's just, we were lucky, you know, like we don't have anyone telling us, you know, we don't have parents involved in the farm or grandparents, you know, we're on in our own tenancy, so we could just go, do you know what, let's just suck it and see what happens. But yeah, I think you kind of find a groove with it. We went out and kind of knew we needed a generic herbal ley. We didn't quite need to be, at the time we weren't very
yeah, we haven't got a GS4, you know, we haven't gone off the shelf as such. We've just probably picked bits
from lots of people.
all different stuff. Like the field that we done ourselves is just a mix that we sort of made up ourselves. We've got a local seed merchant that does, you know, mixes to demand. So we started with that, just picking stuff that we knew would work rather than buying off the shelf mixes. Whether it's right or wrong, we might be putting the wrong things together, but
that's worked. And like I said, going around to lots of different farms and seeing sheep farms, beef farms, dairy farms, getting an idea of what other people are doing, and you can sort of pick little bits from each. We don't really have like you know, we had somebody from Farm Carbon Toolkit that we talk to regularly, but we don't have an agronomist or anything like that. It's just been, right, we know what our farm's capable of, we know what the pH and we know what the soil type is. They've said this does this and they've said that does that. So if we meet somewhere in the middle, let's just have a go and see what happens. So yeah, it's very technical, I'm afraid. Just it's just having the confidence to go, do you know what, let's just try it and see what happens.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the thing. It's almost taking the leap to get involved, and then once you're in it, it's just great and it's perfect.
Yeah.
Cool. I think that's all we've got time for in terms of questions today. But if anyone does have any more questions for either the LEAF team or our speakers, then the contacts will be in the PowerPoint once you send that out, and my contacts will also be on screen at the end of today's session. So just linking back to the take-home messages that Daisy showed earlier on in the PowerPoint, hopefully everyone feels it. They have taken these messages home. They were emission reduction. They're talking about how legumes can help you reduce your carbon footprint. I think David really delved into that area there. And also context, Harley came back to very nicely as well, how it's important to think of the context and what works best for you. And then experimentation as well. I think Kevin and Kate and what you're just saying there really exemplifies that and is a great take-home message for everyone, that it is just about experimenting and find out what works best for you. But it is very versatile as well. And I think that's really important to remember. So I think that's it for today's webinar. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. And an extra special thank you to all of our speakers there. It was completely amazing and fascinating to hear all the different viewpoints and things coming into the project. Daisy can send a link into chat now. If anyone would like to have a look at the LEAF website to do with NUE-Leg, all about the NUE-Leg project and how the farmers are coming along with the legume projects. And that is pretty much it from us. So a massive thank you. There are my details on the screen. If anyone does have any questions or concerns, then feel free to contact me there. We will also be sending up a follow-up email that will also have a questionnaire. And if anyone does have any feedback or ideas for future webinars or anything like that, then feel free to respond to that email and that questionnaire. But that's it from us today. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming to listen. And thank you again to all of our speakers. I hope you guys will have a great afternoon. Thank you.